this tutorial is a good bit of class prep, whether you're new to Pilates or whether you've been doing it quite a while. Covers some of the posture setting, some of the elements of Pilates. So we're going to cover centering. Centering is really important to connect you right into that core, into that deeper core. Connecting with muscles like your transversus abdominis, which is that deepest band of those abdominal muscles. Connecting with your multifidus, which is your deepest strand of back muscles. And your pelvic floor, which sits like a hammock, like a sling, from side to side, front to back, in that pelvis, so that ring at the base of your pelvis. So first of all, we're going to come to a little bit of posture. So within that centering, we think about our rib cage. So for a lot of people, that common problem they have will be their ribs flaring forward, especially when we work really hard with sort of high intensity exercise. A lot of people will tend to flare their ribs forward and extend their back when they're working quite hard. So it's really nice to imagine, we want to get those ribs into that neutral position. So it's quite nice to just put your thumbs on the bottom of your ribs and then just gently track your fingers down to the front of your hips. Now imagine between those 2 points you've got a spring and you're just going to gently engage that spring. So it's quite subtle, so you might not even notice. So I'm just engaging. So I'm doing that by just drawing my lower rib gently down towards my front hip bone. So we don't want to tip the hips up to achieve that tightening of the spring. We want to draw the ribs down. And also be careful that your shoulders don't round. So you need to just get that connection of feeling that gentle engagement through that spring between your lower ribs and your front hip bones. Now we have to just watch here in a lot of exercises when we lift the arms, yeah? So what you want to get practiced at doing, as you lift and move those arms, that spring doesn't change, okay? So that's what you're learning to do, so you don't flare those ribs. So think about that spring. Secondly, we want to set up the posture of our pelvis. So think of a couple of headlights on the front of your pelvis. Think of your pelvis being weighing scales. You want to get that nice and level. Or even think about your pelvis being a bucket of water. So with that bucket of water, just practice a couple of times, tilting the pelvis so you tip some water out the front of your bucket. And then tilting back so you tip some water out the back of your bucket. So that top of the bucket is that ring of your pelvis and your hips. Tip some out the front, tip some out the back. And then you want to find somewhere where you feel nice and level. So for most of us, that's going to just be a gentle downward tip between the back of your hip, the bony bit on the back of your hip, and the bony bit on the front of your hip. So find where that is. If you make a diamond shape between your belly button and your pubic bone, generally as well, when you're in your neutral, when you look down, you're going to have a flat line between those 2 points. Okay? So find that lovely pelvic neutral position and make sure you haven't lost any of those other positions. Now we're going to support all that by engaging into that deeper core. So coming into the lower belly, which really switches on that transversus abdominal muscle that we spoke about earlier. Nice to imagine you've got a couple of magnets or a low slung belt, and you just want to gently draw those magnets together, draw the sides of those ends of those belt together. It's a nice gentle contraction. If we go too hard, we're just really switching on those superficial muscles in the tummy. So we want to engage into the lower belly. We will work the top of the belly as well, but we want to really engage into that deeper core in a lot of the exercises that we do. So it's quite gentle. Then obviously once you get into that, practice in standing, there's lots of other positions you can practice day to day, just going about your daily business. You can take a pause and gently try and engage. So generally you're feeling a little in and up motion of that lower belly. So for the pelvic floor, it's really nice to imagine that you're actually sucking up a little blueberry or a little Malteser up into your back passage, and then you're just shifting it forward to your front passage. So a little gentle squeeze up of that blueberry Malteser, and then just a little gentle push of it forward. For men, it's quite simple. Just imagine you're running into some cold sea. That should do it. So just again, a very gentle contraction. We don't want to overdo it and put a lot of pressure into that pelvic floor. So then thinking about all that, your rib setup, your pelvic setup, your lower belly engagement, your pelvic floor engagement. Think about some of the positions we commonly use. So let's come into that all fours position, coming down to the mat. So just thinking about that center. So in that all fours position, it's nice to imagine you've got a tray of drinks across your back. So if you think of your cat position and your cow position, you can do that a couple of times. And in somewhere in the middle of those, you'll be about neutral. So think about your bucket of water, yeah? Think about your rib cage drawing down and keeping that spring connected. And now think about engaging that lower belly through drawing those magnets and just drawing up through the pelvic floor. So when you think of that pelvic floor engagement, it's pretty much like a drawing up feeling. And that sets you up there for that all fours position. You can also think about a couple of headlights on your front hip bones and back hip bones. Those ones facing to the ceiling, those ones facing to the floor. So wherever you are, the movements and the exercises you come into, you want to try and maintain that nice neutral position. So when we come down to the mat, thinking about our centre, for quite a few of us in this position, as you can see here, we're quite arched through our lower back. So for those, if you feel that you're quite arched in your lower back, I would put a little cushion under your belly so you can see it just flattens the back a little bit when you're in that position. So in this position, whether you have the pillow or not, you're thinking about still engaging through that centre. So it's really easy here just to let the stomach just drop into the mat, let the front of the hips just drop into the mat. So to keep engaged, we engage through that lower belly, draw those magnets, draw up through the pelvic floor, and then just for most people, just a slight downward tip of your tailbone. So as if you've got a tail and you're just pulling it down in between the top of your legs, drifting down towards your feet. Lovely. And you keep that centre set through most of your work when you're in your tummy. So then coming into our rest position, onto our backs. Obviously a really common position we start a lot of our exercises from. So coming into that centering onto the mat. So for all of us, it's going to be very different where we are with that neutral spine. So take that diamond back to try and find your pelvis position. Again, we're thinking about that line, that horizontal flat line between your belly button and the front of your pelvis there, your pubic bone at the front there. Your bucket of water should be nice and level in this position. So support that by drawing those magnets in, drawing that belt together, drawing that lower belly in and up gently. Draw that pelvic floor up, squeeze that blueberry, that Malteser. Now keep that lower rib drawing down, gentle engagement through that spring. So you're going to notice there is a tiny little bit of a gap for most of us between the mat and your back, but you've got that gentle connection. So you don't want to be all the way here and you don't want to be squishing down into the mat. So you're finding that centre, you're keeping it set and you're keeping it active. And that becomes your neutral in that rest position. So wherever you are, whatever you move into, you're trying to maintain that neutral. And lastly, we do a lot of work in side lying. So when you come into side line, thinking about that centre, we think about this top hip. Now to get active and neutral, we want to draw, remember those weighing scales. So at the moment, this top hip, we're a bit tipped up this way. So we draw that top hip down. We think about the headlights on the front of the hips, facing forward. So for most of us, this top hip will just need to roll ever so slightly forward. So we've drawn it down ever so slightly forward. You'll see a slither of light under my underneath side. Keep that headlight facing forward all the time. And then obviously you need to think about your spinal neutral. So make sure you're not too far tipped forward in that bucket or too far tipped back. Lovely. And keep that by just drawing that lower rib down, keeping that spring engaged. Keep your lower belly active and your pelvic floor active wherever you move from this position.